if you don't catch this live, always as a reminder, you can catch it on YouTube, on my YouTube channel using the YouTube command. And then everything, all the up-to-date notes and everything are in Discord, in the defense channel on my Discord server, which you can find using the Discord command. But before we begin, I just kind of want to review what we were talking about last time. So just as a reminder, by the way, this is the defense series, a sequel to the bidding series. Well, not really a sequel, but a logical next step at least. And basically, what my objective with this is to fill out the remainder of the convention card. Which, if you take a look at a convention card, it has these two sections at the bottom. It has leads and carding. Last time we went through leads, we talked about leads against suits. And No Trump talked about making passive versus aggressive leads. Like passive is when your partner has very few values on the auction and that you're the one with all the points, versus aggressive when you have nothing and you're trying to catch your partner, so you lead a little more aggressively to try to find their values. We talked about count leads, and I talked about how I like third and fifth against suits over fourth best because it is a little easier to get an accurate picture of your partner's hand over fourth. If your partner's leading low and they're leading if they lead the deuce, you now know they have three, which is a big advantage, as opposed to it being 3 or 4 if you're just traditionally playing fourth best. So I think that is something worth trying, because it does help you in some situations figure out what's going on the hand. Of course, fourth best is helpful against No Trump because you can employ the rule of 11. But because you're not always leading from 4-card suits against suit contracts, I find third, fifth to be a small improvement. And then we talked about honor leads just a bit. There is Rusino, where you lead the lower of touching honors as opposed to what's standard, aka the higher of touching honors. I don't think Rusino it's super important. I mean, I don't feel like it's a bad thing. It's a little helpful in some situations to know exactly what lead your partner's making. Like, if your partner leads an ace playing Rusino, they're leading from ace empty. You know not to play them for the king unless they messed up. Whereas which is kind of helpful in those situations. And, you also have to think about what to lead from 3-card honor suit sequences in Rusino as opposed to standard. In Rusino with 3-card suits like king, queen, jack, or ace, king, queen, usually you should lead the middle and then low. Because in Rusino, by leading like the queen, for example, from king, queen, jack, you've implied the king, then you follow with the jack. Now your partner knows you have the jack as well. And then we talked about the main thing that I like with those honor leads, which is coded 9s and 10s. Coded 9s and 10s is a way for the lead of the 10 or the 9 to either imply or deny cards above that suit. So the idea is that the lead of the 10 or 9 against any type of contract shows either 2 or 0 higher. This is helpful in certain situations to get a clearer picture of your partner's hand. For example, like against a No Trump contract, if they lead the 10, you can figure out whether they were leading from 10-9 or ace-jack-10 or king-jack-10 pretty quickly. Whereas if they lead the jack, it denies anything higher. The idea is that the 10 or 9 implies, and then the jack denies is the idea behind coded 10s and 9s leads. And I certainly feel like that's an improvement, having that information at your disposal. And you can also play it in the middle of the hand as well without any cost. So that's really what I wanted to cover on leads in a nutshell. That's just a quick recap of what we talked about last time. And now what we want to focus on today is carding and, the different types of signals, when to use them, and so on and so forth. So, there's 3 different types of signals out there, mainly in bridge. I think everybody's familiar with all of them. There's attitude, there's count, and there's suit preference. But when do you make which? The idea is that primarily the first signal that will take priority is attitude. Do you like the lead that your partner made or not? That's pretty straightforward. The standard adage for count is that you use count when they've led a suit. Like if they're leading, if you see like king, queen, fifth, and dummy in a No Trump contract, and they lead the jack, your partner needs to know your count, because if your partner has the ace, they need to know how many rounds they need to hold up in the suit. If they're looking at ace third and you show them odd, they know they can duck the first one and take the second one. Whereas if you show even, they know they have to hold up twice and then take the third one to make sure that they can never get to the dummy to run that suit, assuming it has no other outside entries. Of course, this isn't necessarily the only time you give count, although it's the standard one. Some people play that specific leads, especially against no trump contrast, ask for specific cards. For example, there might be some who have heard the idea that against no trump, the lead of the ace or queen asks for attitude, whereas the lead of the king asks for count or an unblock. The idea there being that if your partner leads the king, they're trying to figure out how many you have in the suit to figure out whether they should try to cash the ace or lead low to keep communication between the two hands. Whereas the ace is just a straight up attitude lead, whether you like it or not, so they can figure out whether they should continue or just switch. So if you do have that and you have agreed upon that with your partner, you do need to also play count in that situation. But standard is that count is usually when they're breaking a suit, especially in no trump in very important situations. It's helpful to give count in those situations because it gives your partner a clear picture of the distribution, and it allows them to figure out how to defend accordingly. And then last but not least is suit preference. Suit preference is kind of like the miscellaneous one that doesn't have a standard situation, but there's a bunch of different situations in which you would use suit preference to denote to your partner which suit you'd like led next. For example, let's say there's no reason to continue the opening lead based on dummy. Like, let's say you've led the ace from ace-king at a suit that you and your partner have supported, and dummy hits with like queen-jack third or queen-jack fourth. In that situation, you're probably not going to want to continue the king next because either you're setting that up or, better yet, it's going to get ruffed. In that situation, you want to know what to switch to. That should be a very clear suit preference situation, like when it's clear that you want to when it's clear like you don't want to continue the suit. Or if like dummy had a singleton, for example, and they're in a trump contract. You know, if you don't want to continue the suit, you should be telling your partner which suit you want led next. And the idea basically is that a low card asks for the lower of the remaining two suits, and by the remaining two suits, I'm talking about the other two non-trump suits, whereas the high card would be for the higher of those two suits. When giving partner a ruff is also a very common one. Like if you're giving your partner a ruff and you're trying to give them yet another, or you're just trying to tell them where they can catch you next, you should give a suit preference signal to denote which suit that's in. You know, like low for the lower of the other two, or high for the higher of the other two, or middle if it doesn't matter. And then one that people sometimes overlook is in the trump suit itself. Like if your spot cards don't matter in trump. And obviously, you don't usually need to give count in trump. Sometimes it's important, but generally, when you're following with meaningless spot cards to a trump suit, it's useful to denote which suit you want next. If your partner ever gets the lead back, and that's what's called trump suit preference. And if you take a look at a convention card, you'll actually see that on here. So, this would just be standard, of course, where, if you play like your lowest and then your highest, that would be for the lowest suit. And you can play them in different orders depending on how many cards you have to denote like which suit you want specifically. Like if you had 3 cards and you wanted the middle suit, you could play high, then you could play middle, then low, then high, for example. So there's a bunch of different ways in which you can play your cards to convey to your partner which suit you're looking for next. And then suit preference, you can also use it in like the order in which you take cards in a contract. Like let's say that your partner's leading a suit, that your partner's led your suit, and you hold like ace, king, queen in that suit, and they're all going to cash. In standard, defense, you'll hear them say play low from the lower of touching honors, because the idea is that if you play high, then you're denying anything below it. Like if you have ace, king, you're supposed to play the king, so that now your partner knows you have the ace, whereas if you play the ace, you deny the king. But if it really doesn't matter in these situations, you can play your cards in a certain order to convey to your partner what suit you like next. Like there should be a difference when you're following suit here between playing the queen, the ace, and the king, than if you go high to low, like ace, king, queen. That should mean something different. If you play ace, king, queen, that should specifically be that you want the higher of the remaining suits if your partner ever gets in. Whereas if you go queen, king, ace, or something like that, that should be for the lowest of the other suits, and so on and so forth. So you can use your spot cards in certain orders to kind of denote what suit you're looking for there. But in theory, the standard signal that you do give to your partner's lead is suit preference, or attitude, I'm sorry. So primary signal to partner's leads, emphasis on partner, is attitude. There are some who play account-based carding system. RFP is one, for example. He plays like this system called Eastern Scientific, where the whole defense is around count signals to figure out the hand. But most of the time, it's attitude. So next up is talking about carding itself. So, the two main types of carding, and this is not discards, because discards has many different types, but carding itself, when you're just following to suits, specifically usually with attitude, is standard versus upside down. Upside down, I feel, is like a more natural carding, because, you're able to use low cards to encourage versus high cards to discourage. That's a pretty big advantage over standard, where you might have to use an unnecessarily high card to encourage your partner, and they may not be able to figure it out if you can't afford that, for example. Showing your interest in a suit continuation by doing it with the deuce instead of a card like the 7 or the 8 is a lot easier. Some suits are going to make this frustrating. I mean, you're never going to always find the perfect spot cards in this situation. Like, what if you're dealt like 8, 7, 6 of a suit? Those types of things make things confound, especially with standard. I mean, the 6, looks like an encouraging card there because it's middle. When, of course, you meant to discourage. It's kind of hard for your partner to sometimes figure that out. Or you're dealt like a suit like Jack 9, 8, and you're trying to encourage your partner in upside down. The 8 definitely looks discouraging, and now it's up to your partner to try to figure it out. You don't always have the perfect suits, but in the long run, I felt like upside down is a more natural form of defense, and with the majority of my partners, I do play that. There's a few people who are like old school and prefer standard, but I think the majority of players these days play upside down, really for that reason, just because it makes the defense a lot easier in terms of like their spot cards. There's also people who play like standard attitude and upside down count, or upside down attitude and standard count. They only play they play one type of carding for the attitude and one type for count, where you're falling to a suit versus when your partner leads a suit. And that's okay too, but, to make things really easy, I like to play one all the way throughout, and that's why I would go with upside down. There's also the idea of upside down suit preference, where you use the higher of two cards, the higher of cards to indicate interest in the lower suit versus the lower to show interest in the higher suit. I know Beckwell play that, but I really don't know anyone else who does, and I don't really see that as a huge advantage. I mean, the main advantage from it is if they don't ask, then they might get confused, because you don't have to disclose that information unless they ask or take a look at your convention card. So there's an advantage in doing that, but it is a little harder to employ if you specifically only use that with one person, for example. So I would say that suit preference can stay standard, but count and attitude, I certainly am a fan of upside down. Then, of course, you have to talk about discards. Now, with discards, there's way more possibilities than just standard and upside down, although they are probably the top 2 candidates out there. There's some other options, though. One is odd-even. The idea with odd-even is that if you discard an odd card in a suit, it's encouraging. So, if you play the 7, you're encouraging that suit, no matter whether it's high or low. Any odd card is encouraging. And if you play an even card, that denies interest in that suit. And then the spot on your even card actually is you showing suit preference. Like if you discard the deuce, you're showing suit preference in the lower of the other 2 suits. If you discard the 8, you're showing interest in the higher of the other 2 suits. So odd encourages, and then even is discouraging with suit preference employed to it. That's not bad. It certainly can work. The only problem with odd-even is, that type of carding now comes down completely to the spot cards that you're dealt. Like, sometimes you're going to have these problem suits where they're even or odd, and it's going to be hard for your partner to figure out. Nobody can control that. It's completely what the dealing machine gives you. So I wouldn't use a carding system where it's really going to come down to your pips like that, where it's going to matter. Plus, if you're bad at math, you could forget. Lappenthal is kind of an improvement on odd-even for that reason. where you're always pitching from a suit that you're discouraging. And now it's just a matter of suit preference. Like, it doesn't have to be odd or even. If you play the 3, it's interest in the lower of the other 2 suits. If it's the 7, it's interest in the higher of the 2 suits. You're just discarding from a suit you're discouraging, and now it's just straight up suit preference. That's an improvement because now this isn't controlled by the spot cards you hold. So if I was to say, if you weren't going to play standard upside down, I would go with Laventhal over odd even, and I certainly feel like that's the more popular one. Odd even is a bit old school, but I feel like Laventhal is a good improvement on it. But either way, if you take a look, actually, you'll see that those 2 options are built into a card. But I'm normally an upside down person with discards. You could certainly argue it either way. If I was going to pick one of these 2, I would go with Laventhal, but I like upside down all the way through. And then the last thing to talk about with carding, and then I'm going to just talk some general defensive tips afterwards, is what's called a Smith Echo. And the idea with the Smith Echo is an example for usually on the first trick in no trump, like if your partner's leading 4th best, you're not always able to show attitude for your partner immediately because you might have to compete for the trick. Like if your partner's leading 4th best and dummy has nothing of relevance, you're going to have to put up your highest card, generally, to compete for the trick. And now your partner doesn't know whether you actually like that lead or whether you just were competing and, you're not interested in anymore. It's not easy to figure out in all those situations. Now, what Smith Echo allows you to do in that situation is that the next suit, as long as you're not competing for the trick and you're just following, you can use your next card to denote whether you like the lead or not. Like if they break a suit, and let's say you're playing standard reverse Smith. Well, I mean standard Smith, I'm sorry, because reverse is something entirely different. But let's say you're playing standard carding. And so what I was about to get into, and I kind of jumped the gun there, is that there's 2 different types of Smith, really. There's standard and then there's reverse. And then it really just comes down to what type of carding you normally play. Like if you play standard carding, I would play standard Smith, where on the next card, as long as you're not competing for the trick, if you play high, you're encouraging, and if you play low, you're discouraging. And that's encouraging or discouraging the suit that your partner led at trick 1, because they're usually not playing that suit at trick 2. They're probably playing another suit. And then reverse, is really used for the people who play upside down carding, where low encourages and high discourages. So it's just kind of like flip, just like upside down. Now, you can't always use reverse Smith or standard Smith. Sometimes you have to give count, depending on the situation. Like for example, if it is a dead dummy and you're trying to hold up X amount of times to make sure they can't get to it, count will take precedence. But if it's going to be meaningless, then you can use your spot card to indicate interest or disinterest in your partner's opening suit. That way, if they need to find the shift, they can figure it out. So that is a powerful thing to play. And it's usually just against no trump. Against suit contracts, you're not going to have you're not going to have those same problems. You should be able to figure out the picture a little quicker there in suit contracts. So it's really just a no trump thing. So, but it is something worth playing. So I would check it off against no trump, and then I would write in reverse if we were playing upside down, or standard if we were or I wouldn't write in anything at all if we were playing standard. But since we are playing upside down here, or at least that's what I'm recommending, I would put in reverse there for reverse Smith. And yeah, that's really it for carding. And so I guess I'll just close by talking about some general tips to help you out on defense, because I think this is something some players overlook when they're thinking about how they should approach their defense. I mean, the key thing that you have to figure out with defense is, you have to draw a picture and figure out your partner's hand, but also you have to figure out the declarer's hand. If you can figure out those things, you're going to be able to map out the defense pretty well. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. First, of course, is figuring out what suits your partner's likes and doesn't like from signals, and kind of like what their shape is from the count with which they follow the suits. When you do that, you can get a pretty good picture that way. But there's way more than that. You also have to figure out things from the auction. If they open a no trump, they have between 15 to 17 points, assuming they're playing a standard range. You should go from there. You should be counting high cards every single time they play an on. every single time they play an Honor Dare, you should be counting points and trying to figure out, okay, what can they possibly have remaining? And then specifically, what can they not have remaining? AKA, what has to be in my partner's hand? Those are the types of things you can figure out. Like if they've shown up with 14 points, and you're trying to figure out if you're where the remaining ace is. You know it's not in the opener's hand because now it's added up to be too many points. You know that's in your partner's hand, so if you have to underlead, you probably safely can. Likewise, like if they've opened a no trump and they denied an invite, like if their partner invited, now you know they're on the lower range, 15 or 16. And now if you're trying to figure out whether they have an extra jack or not or an extra queen, you can probably safely assume they don't because they would have accepted the invite if they had it. So those are the types of cards you can put in your partner's hand. Of course, you also have to be able to follow distributions from the auction. Like if they've opened a major and then bid a minor after like a forcing no trump, you already have a picture that they have at least 8 cards in those 2 suits, usually 9, especially if they play semi-forcing no trump, for example. Now from there, you can figure out, my partner has X cards in this suit, and they have so on and so forth. You can get a good picture of your partner shape from that. And then you can also use it to figure out Declare's shape pretty quickly, although I would think in those situations you can probably arrive at Declare's shape quicker than you can arrive at your partner's. But yeah, it's really just a combination of using the auction, thinking your way through it. Why did Declare play the hand a certain way they did? All those types of information that you can add up in your head. That's how you map out an entire defense as best as possible. It takes a combination of signals from your partner and the auction itself. You have to use everything there to really arrive at the best way to defend a hand. And, I think I do a pretty good job of when I'm like playing on this channel of trying to talk my way through a defense to myself and for everybody else's, ideas as well. And sometimes it doesn't work well. If you're playing in a bad field, for example, you're not going to be able to safely make these assumptions because they will do something bad in the bidding that's going to throw you off, or they're going to play the hand in such a convoluted way that you're going to put them for a card that they don't have, or you're going to say they can't have a card but they actually do. Sometimes you'll get fixed, but if you're like in a better and stronger game and you can trust these people to do reasonable actions, then with that type of information at your disposal, you should usually be able to draw out a defense. And I will try to take a focused approach of, going forward when I am defending contracts like that, talking my way through it for everybody's information. And of course, you can always ask questions and ask why I didn't do something. I'm not perfect on defense. I screw up often. My leads are not perfect. They're reasonable, but I've also shot myself in the foot many, many times with leads trying to be smart. Whereas if I just did the field thing, I would have been fine. But, I feel like in the long run, especially in the higher level events, it's been one of my strong suits. So I feel like I'm in a good position with it. And hopefully everything I've said to this point makes sense. I think this is a good part to stop the series. Of course, there's a lot more out there on defense. But really anything beyond this is probably best answered by a book and not myself. There's a bunch of good resources out there. If you're interested in what the best books are on defense, I can give some recommendations based on the ones I've read a long time ago. Or if you're evaluating options, I could try to parse through it and figure out what the best one is. But yeah, I think that is the note on which I'm going to stop this. I hope this was it was short. I know it was a short series, but I hope it was an informative series nonetheless. And like I said, if you guys have any more questions about this or any more ideas on future topics that I can talk about, I would always be happy to address them because I do like doing this and would like to continue making it a theme going forward. Thank you guys, and I will talk to everybody later. And that's where I'm going to cut off the lesson/YouTube part, and then we'll just jump back into streaming-related stuff. Hey, what's going on, Rusty? Good to see you, my friend. Let me take a screenshot of this so I can put it in the defense channel. And then we will get ready for the third and final match